The afternoon sun glazed the road in golden light as Ethan leaned against the bus window, watching the familiar countryside blur by. It had been 2 years since he'd left his small hometown for university, 2 years since he'd last seen Liam, his childhood friend. When Liam invited him to spend a few days by the river, Ethan hesitated at first. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because home felt more distant now, not in miles but in meaning. Still, curiosity and nostalgia had their way of pulling him back. When he arrived, the air smelled of rain-soaked grass and pine. Liam's old house stood just as he remembered, paint peeling on the porch, the river murmuring somewhere beyond the trees. Liam greeted him with his usual energy, a mix of laughter and loud stories about city life. Ethan smiled, listening, but his eyes wandered, until they landed on the figure standing by the doorway. Daniel, Liam's father, was taller than Ethan remembered, his presence quiet yet firm. There was a calmness about him, a gravity that drew attention without demanding it. He smiled politely, the corners of his eyes creasing. "You've grown, Ethan. University suits you," he said, his tone warm but measured. "Good to see you again, Mr. Hale," Ethan replied, offering a handshake. Daniel's hand was strong, calloused from years of work, and lingered just a second longer than expected. Ethan told himself it was nothing, just the familiarity of an old family friend, but something about Daniel's gaze unsettled him. Not discomfort, exactly. More like curiosity that he didn't understand. The evening unfolded softly. Liam talked endlessly, catching Ethan up on everything, friends who'd moved away, the local shop that had closed, the festivals they'd missed. Daniel sat quietly, occasionally adding a dry comment that made both of them laugh. When dinner was over, Liam excused himself to call a friend, leaving Ethan and Daniel alone at the table. For a moment, neither spoke. The room hummed with the low whir of the ceiling fan. Daniel leaned back, studying Ethan with a kind of gentle interest. "You seem steadier than before," he said. "College must have changed you." Ethan shrugged, unsure what to say. "Maybe. I think I've just learned how to pretend I know what I'm doing." Daniel's chuckle was low, sincere. "That's most of adulthood," he said, his voice dipping into something almost intimate. "Pretending until it starts to feel real." Ethan smiled faintly, the words echoing in him longer than they should have. It wasn't the kind of talk he expected from Liam's father, thoughtful, vulnerable. He found himself wanting to ask more, but Daniel stood, collecting dishes. The moment broke, leaving behind an aftertaste of something unspoken. Later, in his guest room, Ethan lay awake listening to the faint rustle of leaves outside. The house creaked with the familiar language of old wood and wind. When he finally rose to close the window, his eyes caught a flicker of movement near the riverbank. Daniel was there, standing alone, his silhouette framed by the moonlight. His posture wasn't rigid or weary, just still, as if the night had claimed him entirely. Ethan hesitated, then stepped back from the window. It felt wrong to watch, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. There was something deeply human in that image, something that didn't belong to a man known only as someone's father. The next morning, Ethan woke early to the smell of coffee. He found Daniel in the kitchen, pouring 2 mugs. "Liam still asleep," Daniel said without looking up. "Thought you might want some." Ethan accepted the cup, their fingers brushing briefly. It was the smallest touch, yet it startled him. He looked away, pretending not to notice the way his chest tightened. They drank in silence, the quiet punctuated by the distant call of river birds. Daniel glanced toward the window where sunlight filtered through the curtains. "It's good you came back," he said quietly. "Sometimes we need to return to places that remind us who we were, before everything changed." Ethan nodded, unsure what Daniel meant, but he felt the weight of it all the same. The words carried a sadness, like an echo from a life half-lived. When Liam finally stumbled in, yawning and cheerful, the spell broke. The morning filled with laughter again, plans for fishing and exploring, talk of the river. Yet even as Ethan smiled, his thoughts lingered elsewhere, on Daniel's voice, on the stillness of the previous night, and the strange warmth in his chest he didn't know how to name. That he told himself it was just admiration, nothing more. But as he stepped outside and the river glimmered in the distance, something inside him whispered otherwise. The story of the river was only beginning. Morning mist hovered above the river, silver and weightless, when Ethan stepped outside. The air was cool and damp, rich with the scent of water and pine. He spotted Daniel by the bank, his figure steady, fishing rod in hand. For a moment, Ethan considered turning back, afraid of the quiet that always seemed to grow between them, but something drew him forward. Daniel glanced over his shoulder and smiled faintly. "Didn't expect you up this early." "I couldn't sleep," Ethan admitted, settling beside him. The grass was still wet beneath his shoes. Daniel's line trembled with the river's current. "The world's quieter before everyone else wakes up," he said. "You can hear yourself think." Ethan nodded, though his thoughts weren't quiet at all. He watched Daniel's hands, strong, deliberate, patient. There was a grace in his movements that made the silence between them feel meaningful instead of empty. When Daniel reeled in the line, Ethan helped him gather the gear. Their fingers brushed again, light and fleeting, but it sent a pulse of awareness through Ethan that he couldn't disguise. They walked back to the house with the day stretching out ahead of them. Liam was gone, a note on the kitchen counter saying he'd gone into town to meet friends. Ethan felt an odd relief, then guilt for feeling it. Daniel poured them both coffee. "Seems we've got the day to ourselves," he said. His tone was simple, but it carried something that made Ethan's heart stir, anticipation. Maybe. The hours unfolded slowly. Daniel asked if Ethan could help fix the small boat moored near the dock. Together they worked in the sun, sleeves rolled, the smell of oil and wood thick around them. Ethan admired how Daniel explained things, precise yet patient, his voice calm, never condescending. He realized he wanted to impress him, to be seen not as Liam's friend, but as someone capable, equal. When the engine finally coughed back to life, Daniel laughed, a sound low and unguarded. Ethan found himself laughing too, though he wasn't sure why. The shared joy of it made his chest ache in a way he couldn't name. They took a break under the shade of a willow tree, the river shimmering behind them. Daniel handed Ethan a bottle of water, their shoulders close enough that the warmth of Daniel's skin lingered even in the breeze. "Do you ever miss it?" Ethan asked suddenly. "When everything felt simpler." Daniel's eyes stayed on the river. "Every day," he said quietly. "But time doesn't ask if we're ready to move on. It just does." Ethan studied him, the sharp line of his jaw soft in the sunlight. "You make it sound like you've lost more than time." Daniel's lips curved into a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe I have." For a long while, neither spoke. The silence between them grew denser, but not uncomfortable. Ethan wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the distance, yet he couldn't. Every word felt too small for the feeling that had begun to take root inside him. By late afternoon, clouds gathered across the horizon. A light rain began, tapping gently on the leaves. They hurried back to the porch, laughing as the drops caught them halfway. Daniel fetched 2 mugs of tea, and they sat together, watching the river turn darker under the gray sky. Ethan glanced sideways. The lines on Daniel's face looked deeper in the dim light, carved by years of quiet endurance. He wanted to ask what had broken him so gently, but he didn't dare. Instead, he said, "You seem different here. Happier, maybe." Daniel looked at him then, his gaze steady and unreadable. "Out here, I don't have to pretend," he said. "No one's watching." The words lingered between them, heavier than the rain. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Something unspoken hovered at the edge of that moment, but neither crossed it. When the rain eased, Daniel rose. "We should get dinner started before Liam comes back." Ethan nodded, though he didn't move right away. As Daniel walked inside, Ethan stayed on the porch, staring at the river as dusk deepened. The world felt suspended, caught between the calm of friendship and the tremor of something more. He knew what he was feeling wasn't right. Daniel was Liam's father, off limits, untouchable. Yet the more he told himself that, the less it mattered. There was something about Daniel's quietness, his honesty, that filled a space in Ethan he hadn't realized was empty. Inside, the lights flickered on, warm against the cool gray of evening. Ethan watched Daniel's shadow move through the kitchen window, and the pull in his chest grew stronger, undeniable. He whispered to himself, barely audible over the sound of the rain returning, "Why does it feel like I'm standing on the edge of something I can't step away from?" And though the night offered no answer, he knew this wasn't the end of it, only the beginning of what he couldn't yet name. The evening carried a strange stillness, a quiet that seemed to hum beneath every sound. Liam had left for a late bonfire by the lakeside, calling over his shoulder that he'd be back after midnight. Ethan watched him disappear down the gravel road, the headlights fading until the darkness swallowed them whole. Only the rhythm of crickets and the slow rush of the river remained. Inside, Daniel was washing dishes from dinner, sleeves rolled, his movements calm and deliberate. Ethan hovered by the doorway, unsure if he should stay or retreat to his room. But something about the silence felt magnetic. "Do you ever go down to the river at night?" Ethan asked finally. Daniel looked up, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes. It's quieter then. The river sounds different after dark." When he spoke, Ethan noticed how his voice softened, like he wasn't talking about the river at all. "Would you mind if I came with you?" Ethan asked. Daniel hesitated only a second, then nodded. "Sure. Bring a jacket, it gets cold." They walked in silence, the grass cool beneath their feet, moonlight threading through the trees. The river glimmered silver, gentle and endless. Daniel led the way to the old wooden dock that stretched out over the water. He sat at the edge, his reflection shimmering below. Ethan sat beside him, careful to keep a little space between them, though the air already felt too close. For a long while, they said nothing. The night seemed to listen with them. Then Daniel sighed, the kind of sigh that carried more weight than words. "Ethan," he began, voice low, "do you ever feel like you're living a life that isn't really yours?" Ethan turned to him, startled by the question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I think everyone does." "You mean, pretending to be okay when you're not?" Daniel's lips curved faintly. "Something like that." He paused, fingers tracing the wood beside him. "After the divorce, I thought I'd start over. But I just kept existing, day after day, like I was waiting for something to change on its own." Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to say something comforting, but nothing seemed enough. "You deserve to be happy," he said softly. Daniel looked at him then, really looked, eyes steady, searching. "And you?" What do you deserve? Ethan's breath caught. I don't know, he whispered. Maybe to feel understood. The wind shifted. The river whispered against the dock. Daniel's gaze didn't waver. Maybe that's what we're both looking for, he said quietly. Their words seemed to dissolve into the night, replaced by a silence that pulsed with meaning. Ethan could feel his heartbeat in his throat. He told himself to look away, to move, to laugh it off, but he couldn't. The moment held him there, fragile and inevitable. Daniel turned back to the river, his expression unreadable. You remind me of myself, when I was younger, he murmured. Restless. Curious. Always searching for something I couldn't name. Ethan swallowed hard. And did you ever find it? Daniel shook his head. Maybe I was too afraid to. A long pause followed. Then, quietly, Ethan said, maybe it's not too late. The words left him before he could think. They hung in the air between them, reckless, sincere. Daniel's hand tightened slightly on the edge of the dock, his knuckles pale in the moonlight. For a moment, neither of them moved. The river lapped gently against the wood, a sound too calm for what Ethan felt inside. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice was a whisper. You don't know what you're saying. I do, Ethan said, his tone steady though his heart trembled. At least, I think I do. Daniel turned to face him again, and in that look was everything Ethan feared and wanted: longing, confusion, restraint. The distance between them felt unbearably thin. Daniel exhaled, his voice breaking the silence. Some truths are meant to stay unspoken, Ethan. Not because they aren't real, but because they can't survive in daylight. Ethan nodded slowly, tears glinting at the corners of his eyes. Then maybe it's enough that we both know, he said. For a moment, neither moved. Then Daniel rose, extending a hand to help Ethan up. His touch was firm, grounding. Together, they walked back toward the house, the sound of the river following like a secret. When they reached the porch, Daniel paused by the steps. Get some sleep, he said gently. Tomorrow will come faster than you think. Ethan nodded, but as he climbed the stairs, he glanced back. Daniel was still standing there, looking toward the water, his face caught between moonlight and shadow. That image, quiet, strong, and impossibly distant, etched itself into Ethan's memory. He knew they had crossed a line, even if no one else could see it, and though nothing more was said, the night had already changed everything. The following morning arrived with a brightness that mocked Daniel's sleepless night. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting long beams across the counter where Ethan stood buttering toast as if nothing had happened. He greeted Daniel with an easy grin, his voice steady, casual. Morning. Coffee's on. Daniel managed a nod, pouring himself a mug while carefully avoiding Ethan's eyes. The memory of the previous night pulsed between them like an invisible current. Every word felt heavier, every silence more pronounced. Ethan, however, seemed determined to behave as though nothing had changed. He joked about the football score, teased Daniel about his rumpled hair, and slid the plate of toast across the table. For a moment, Daniel almost let himself believe the distance could be patched up with laughter and routine. But beneath the surface, the memory lingered. Ethan's whispered "Don't stop," the warmth of his hand against his wrist. That evening, Claire arrived. Her presence filled the apartment in a way Daniel could never compete with. She hugged Ethan tightly, kissed him with unguarded affection, and chattered about her week. Daniel watched from the edge of the living room, smiling politely, feeling like a guest in his own home. Guilt pressed heavy in his chest. He shouldn't resent her, yet every touch she gave Ethan sharpened the ache he carried. Dinner was lively, though Daniel spoke little. Claire's laughter rang through the small space, and Ethan played his part well, attentive and loving. But Daniel noticed the flickers, moments when Ethan's eyes drifted toward him, lingering just a second too long before snapping back to her. It was subtle, but enough to remind Daniel that he wasn't alone in remembering. When Claire finally left, the apartment fell quiet. Ethan lingered by the window, staring out at the city lights, his shoulders tense. Daniel pretended to tidy the table, though his hands shook. "You've been quiet," Ethan said at last, his voice low. Daniel forced a shrug. "Just tired." Ethan turned then, his expression softer, conflicted. He hesitated before stepping closer. "I haven't stopped thinking about it. Last night." The words landed like a confession Daniel both dreaded and craved. "Ethan, I know," Ethan interrupted, running a hand through his hair. "I shouldn't have let it happen. Claire, she deserves better. But when you touched me, He broke off, exhaling sharply. "I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to push him away, to demand he return to the safety of loyalty, but instead he whispered, "Then what do you want?" Ethan's answer came not in words but in movement. He stepped forward, closing the gap, his hand finding Daniel's shoulder with hesitant urgency. Their eyes locked, the silence thick, before Ethan finally leaned in. The kiss was tentative at first, a question hanging in the air, but when Daniel didn't pull back, it deepened, charged with everything they had denied. The world seemed to narrow to the heat of their mouths, the press of Ethan's body, the unspoken admission that they had crossed the line completely. For a few dizzying minutes, nothing else existed, no guilt, no fiancé, no rules. When they finally broke apart, Ethan's breathing was ragged. He stared at Daniel as if trying to memorize him, then whispered, "No one can ever know." Daniel nodded, though his heart pounded with equal parts exhilaration and dread. The weight of betrayal pressed in, but so did the undeniable thrill of being chosen, if only in secret. Later that night, alone in his bed, Daniel lay awake replaying every detail. His lips still tingled, his skin still burned with the echo of Ethan's touch. Sleep eluded him, replaced by the dangerous truth. They had gone too far to retreat, yet had no safe path forward. He knew this wasn't the end. If anything, it was only the beginning of a secret neither of them could resist.